In 2024, the United Kingdom's minimum wage hit its highest point on record, £11.44 an hour. Politicians stood in front of cameras and called it a victory. In the same month, insolvency records showed accommodation and food services, the sector most dependent on low-wage workers, filing for bankruptcy at the highest rate in over a decade. Both things were true at the same time. The floor had never been higher. The businesses that relied on people earning near that floor had never been more exposed. The documented evidence was already there. Employment surveys, internal Treasury briefings, peer-reviewed academic studies. The Office for Budget Responsibility had noted the risks in its own fiscal forecasts for years. The files existed. Most people never followed the paper trail. If that interests you, subscribe, because this channel covers what most people slept through. To understand what happened, you have to go back to where the idea came from and why it became politically untouchable. The minimum wage was born out of a simple premise. If the market won't pay workers enough to live on, the government will force it to. The logic was moral before it was economic. In the early 20th century, the United States had workers in textile mills and meatpacking plants earning wages so low they couldn't cover food and rent simultaneously. Child labor was routine. Factory conditions were dangerous. The government stepped in. In the United States, the federal minimum wage was introduced in 1938 under Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, set at 25 cents an hour. That sounds trivial now. Adjusted for inflation, it is roughly equivalent to $4.80 today. It covered a narrow slice of workers. But the principle had been established. The state could set a floor beneath labor markets. In the United Kingdom, the argument took longer. Wages were historically managed through industry-level bargaining between unions and employer associations. It wasn't until 1999, under Tony Blair's Labour government, that the UK introduced a national minimum wage set at £3.60 an hour. The Confederation of British Industry warned it would destroy jobs. The Institute for Fiscal Studies expressed caution. The policy passed anyway. For decades after, the economics were genuinely contested. The old textbook argument was straightforward. Wages are a price. If you force the price of labor up, employers buy less of it. They hire fewer people, cut hours, or close. It was supply and demand applied to human beings. Then a study arrived that became the most cited piece of evidence in the entire debate. In 1993, two Princeton economists, David Card and Alan Krueger, examined what happened in New Jersey when the state raised its minimum wage from $4.05 to $5.05. They compared New Jersey to neighboring Pennsylvania, which didn't raise its floor over the same period. Their finding was striking. Employment in New Jersey's fast food sector didn't fall. If anything, it rose slightly relative to Pennsylvania. The study landed like a grenade in the debate. It suggested the textbooks were wrong. It implied that in the real world, raising the minimum wage didn't cost jobs the way the theory predicted. Card won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2021, partly on the strength of this and related work. Politicians on both sides of the Atlantic pointed to it constantly. If raising the minimum wage doesn't cost jobs, the argument against raising it collapses, and so governments raised the floor again and again, with accelerating confidence. In the UK, the national living wage, a higher rate minimum specifically for workers aged 23 and over, was introduced in 2016 by Chancellor George Osborne. At the time, it was set at £7.20. By April 2024, it sat at £11.44. That is a 59% increase in 8 years. During the same period, overall inflation rose by approximately 40%. The wage floor outpaced the cost of living, and it outpaced productivity growth in the sectors most affected. In the United States, the federal floor remained frozen at $7.25 unchanged since 2009, but states and cities moved independently. By 2024, over 30 states had minimum wages above the federal level. California had reached $16 an hour. Washington, D.C. sat at $17. Several cities exceeded $20. New York's minimum wage for fast food workers hit $22.50. The political logic was clean and appealing. Wages are too low, so raise them. Workers will be better off. Poverty will fall. Employment data said the sky hadn't fallen. The policy looked vindicated. The documented record tells a more complicated story. The Card and Krueger study had a problem that took years to fully surface. It measured employment, the number of people on payroll, but it did not measure hours. Those are not the same thing. You can freeze headcount and cut every worker from 40 hours a week to 32, and the employment figure stays flat. The worker's income drops 20%. The statistic shows nothing changed. This is not theoretical. It is documented. Research published in the Review of Economics and Statistics, one of the most respected peer-reviewed journals in the field, found that a significant share of the employment adjustment for minimum wage increases flows through reduced hours rather than job losses. The headline employment number holds. Weekly earnings for low-wage workers, adjusted for hours, often do not rise as much as the hourly rate suggests. The Office for Budget Responsibility, the UK government's independent fiscal watchdog, documented this dynamic in its own modeling. Its assessments of the national living wage noted consistently that the policy's aggregate benefits were real but unevenly distributed, with the smallest businesses and the most hours-flexible sectors absorbing the bulk of the adjustment invisibly. There is a second mechanism that the official narrative consistently omitted: training. Entry-level jobs are not just jobs. They are, for many workers, the first rung of a ladder. On-the-job training, formal apprenticeships, and progression pathways are part of the implicit compensation package, often worth more over a career than the wage itself. When a business is under pressure from rising floor costs, training budgets are among the first things cut. They don't show up on wage slips. Their removal is invisible to the statistics. Internal communications from the British Retail Consortium, obtained through Freedom of Information requests and published in trade press, documented employer decisions to pull back apprenticeship programs, reduce management training pipelines, and freeze internal progression schemes as wage costs accelerated from 2018 onwards. The entry-level worker had a higher hourly rate. They got fewer pathways out of that entry-level role. Then there is automation. This is where the paper trail becomes most direct. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research in the United States analyzed investment in automation technology against minimum wage changes across states and time periods. The finding was documented and specific. A 10% increase in the minimum wage was associated with a measurable acceleration in automation investment by large employers, supermarkets, logistics companies, fast food chains, and a reduction in such investment by small businesses that couldn't afford the capital outlay. The large employers replaced labor with machines. The small employers absorbed the cost, compressed margins, and eventually closed. Self-checkout tills, automated ordering kiosks, AI scheduling systems that optimize for minimum payroll at each hour of the day. This technology already existed. The rising cost of human labor changed whether deploying it made financial sense. The minimum wage increase tipped the calculation. And then there is the problem that receives the least attention: the regional floor. A national minimum wage applies identically in every corner of the country. £11.44 per hour is the floor whether you are employing a barista in central London or running a fish and chip shop in rural County Durham. In London, that number is barely relevant. The median wage in inner London already sits well above it. The market had already set a higher floor on its own. The policy changes little. In parts of the northeast of England, in coastal towns, in former industrial areas where economic activity never fully recovered from deindustrialization, the picture is different. According to Office for National Statistics earnings data, by 2023, over 30% of all workers in some northern English constituencies were paid at or within 5 pence of the minimum wage, not because employers were exploiting them, because the local economy genuinely did not generate higher productivity. The minimum wage in those areas wasn't a floor, it had become the ceiling. When you compress wages at the bottom and the top simultaneously, businesses lose the ability to differentiate. The experienced worker and the new hire cost nearly the same. There is no incentive to invest in training, promote from within, or retain skilled staff. The entire compensation structure collapses toward the floor. According to research by the Resolution Foundation, sectors with the highest share of minimum wage workers, hospitality, retail, social care, recorded the largest declines in total paid hours between 2016 and 2023. Workers were on the payroll. Their hours were quietly gone. None of this was part of the official story. The government's communications on the national living wage were consistent throughout this period. The policy was working. Employment had held up. Workers were earning more. The pessimists had been proved wrong. Ad framing was not dishonest in the narrow sense. Headline employment figures did remain broadly stable. There was no dramatic unemployment spike that could be directly attributed to the wage floor. And for that visible metric, the policy was declared a success. What the communications did not include was everything that doesn't show up in headline employment. They did not include the hours data. When the Resolution Foundation submitted detailed earnings and hours analysis to parliamentary inquiries on the national living wage, the findings were noted in committee reports and then largely absent from the ministerial statements that followed. They did not include the insolvency data. Companies' house records show that insolvencies in accommodation and food services, the hospitality sector, began rising steeply from 2022 and remained elevated through 2024. The government's public position attributed this entirely to post-pandemic adjustment and energy costs. Those were real factors. So was the wage floor. The public communications separated them. The academic literature did not. They did not include the automation investment data. Retail sector capital expenditure reports, corporate earnings calls, and CMA filings documented the acceleration in automated checkout and logistics systems. The driver was explicitly named in some filings, rising labor costs. It did not appear in ministerial summaries. They did not include what was happening in regional labor markets. Wage compression in northern and coastal constituencies was visible in ONS data to any analyst who looked. It was not visible in the national averages used in press releases. What was consistently emphasized was the number on the poster, the floor, the rate, the headline. What was consistently absent was the picture beneath it. The consequences of rapid minimum wage increases fall unevenly. They always have. For large employers, supermarket chains, fast food multinationals, logistics operators, large hotel groups, the minimum wage is a cost to manage, not a threat to survive. They have legal and financial teams modeling labor costs years in advance. They have capital to invest in automation. They can spread wage increases across thousands of workers and pass costs to consumers in price rises that individually are too small to provoke complaint. Tesco's annual report acknowledged rising labor costs as a factor in price increases. Customers paid. The business adapted. It continued. For the small business owner, the independent cafe, the local cleaning company, the family-run care home, the restaurant that doesn't have a corporate parent, the mathematics are entirely different. Labor is not one cost among many. It is the dominant cost. For a small hospitality business, staffing can represent 60 to 70% of operating expenses. When the floor rises faster than revenue, the options are limited. Cut hours, reduce headcount, stop hiring, or close. The Federation of Small Businesses in the United Kingdom surveyed its members in 2023. Over a quarter of small employers reported freezing new recruitment as a direct consequence of minimum wage increases. Not reducing existing staff, freezing new hires. The person who might have got their first job at that business never appeared in an unemployment statistic. They simply never got the job. That loss is real. It is documented in the survey data. It does not appear in the headline employment figure. In the United States, the evidence is similarly specific. Economists at Harvard and the University of California tracked restaurant closures in Seattle across the period when the city raised its minimum wage from $9.32 to $13. Their finding: restaurants with below-average ratings, the marginal businesses, the ones with thinner customer bases and tighter margins, closed at a meaningfully higher rate in the period following the wage increase than restaurants above the median rating. The stronger restaurants absorbed the cost. The weaker ones did not survive it. The workers who had jobs at those restaurants lost them. There is an honest acknowledgement to be made here. For the workers who kept their hours and their jobs, the higher minimum wage delivered real benefit. A worker on the UK's national living wage in 2024 earned more, in real terms, than a worker on the minimum wage in 2016. That money was real. It was spent. It supported households. But those gains were not distributed evenly within the low-wage workforce. The worker whose hours were cut from 40 a week to 30 did not share in them. Their hourly rate went up. Their income went down. The worker in a coastal town where the only employer on the high street closed did not share in them either. The aggregate statistic captures the gain. It does not capture the loss that happened alongside it. That is not an accident of measurement. It is a predictable feature of how the data is collected and how it is reported. There is a version of the minimum wage argument that holds up under scrutiny. In labor markets where employers hold significant power over workers, where workers cannot easily leave, have limited options, and cannot bargain effectively, a pay floor can correct a genuine imbalance. It can lift wages without destroying employment, because employers were already suppressing pay below what a competitive market would have produced. Economists call this monopsony. It means a market where there is effectively one buyer, in this case, one buyer of labor, and that buyer uses its position to pay less than the worker's true value. The evidence that monopsony is real in some labor markets is solid. Care workers in rural areas with limited alternative employers. Agricultural workers dependent on specific seasonal contractors. Workers in industrialized towns where one dominant employer sets the local wage norm. In those markets, a pay floor does what its advocates claim. The problem is implementation. The policy as built does not distinguish between a labor market with genuine employer power and a labor market where wages are low because the business itself operates on genuinely thin margins. A restaurant in central London serving 200 covers a night and a restaurant in a small northern town serving 40 are regulated identically. The same floor, the same rate, the same obligations. The floor has now risen to a level and at a speed that exceeds what the evidence from Card, Krueger, and their successors was ever built to support. Those studies examined modest increases in specific markets at specific moments in time. They did not model a sustained, decade-long campaign of floor increases running above inflation and productivity simultaneously across every region and every sector of a national economy. The consequences are in the record: insolvency filings, hours data, automation investment, recruitment freezes, regional wage compression. They are documented. They are available. This is the reason that getting a first job or a second job or any job at the bottom of the UK or US labor market is harder in practice than the unemployment rate suggests. The floor was raised. Some workers rose with it. Others found that the job they would have been offered no longer exists, not because it was outsourced, not because demand collapsed, but because the cost of creating it exceeded what the business could absorb. The number on the press release went up. What happened beneath it is in the files. Most people never looked. Most people slept through this. You didn't. Subscribe, because there's more.